Psalm 145, verses 6 to 13 in the New Jerusalem Bible. They will speak of your awesome power, and I shall recount your greatness. They will bring out the memory of your great generosity and joyfully acclaim your saving justice. Yahweh is tenderness and pity, slow to anger, full of faithful love. Yahweh is generous to all. His tenderness embraces all his creatures. All your creatures shall thank you, Yahweh, and your faithful shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingship and tell of your might, making known your mighty deed to the children of Adam, the glory and majesty of your kingship. Your kingship is a kingship forever. Your reign lasts from age to age. Yahweh is trustworthy in all his words and upright in all his deeds. This is a section of scripture that John Wesley often quoted. In this psalm, King David is singing praises to God for his greatness and his kingship. In the psalm, David focuses on the universal truth of God's greatness and how all creation will one day praise him. Nick Polk, do you think the simple truth of God's greatness can help us better engender unity today?
Short answer, yes. Long answer, it depends on how people interpret it. But I would like to think that the way that we want to shape the world as a church reflects the God that David praises in that psalm.
Yeah. And as we get deeper into that this episode, just remember, you got two soft universalists. This can get dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Whole Church Podcast, possibly your favorite church unity podcast. Again, if you have others, let us know about them. We'd like to have those other podcasts on our show so we can just work together in unity. One thing about Unity Podcasts, you don't have competition, you just have fellow teammates. Guys, I am Joshua Noel. I'm one of your co-hosts. I am without my other co-host, which is okay, because next week, he will be without me. More on that later. We'll tell you who the guest is, but I just need to leave you guys wondering. It's a great guest. I'm really upset I'm going to miss it. Anyway, I'm Joshua Noel. I'm here with the wonderful, the beautiful, the awe-inspiring, and intelligent Nick Polk. How's it going, Nick?
It's good, Josh. Thanks for having me. I am very excited, and I'm always just glad to accept your compliments when I come on any of your podcasts.
I'm just glad to compliment you. It's my pleasure, as Chick-fil-A would have me say. Not sponsored, unfortunately. Chick-fil-A, hit me up. But Nick, I'm so excited to have you on, man. We realized a couple weeks back, we had you on. We were talking about Theology Beer Camp with some people, did like a giant crossover with a few other podcasts. And we're like, wait a minute. Nick hasn't been on an episode proper of Whole Church. So we're bringing him on. We're going to talk about Tolkien. You know, he's part of the Tolkien Society, part of Tolkien Heads. He does Tolkien Pop. He does a lot of Tolkien stuff. But he also is part of, I'm going to not remember the name. I know it has like Wesleyan, the word society, and either like theology or smart people. I want to say it's the Wesleyan Smart People Society.
Yeah, 100%. Wesleyan Smart People Society. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's the Wesleyan Theological Society.
I like tell them about that smart people. I like that.
Yeah, the WSPS. Yeah.
See, that's how you know real smart people. They don't refer to themselves as smart people.
Yeah. Well,
I, on the other hand, I just give people the title.
which is humble. It may show that you are maybe the smartest. I don't know.
I know that like we had this joke at one of my other workplaces. And this might offend some people. I don't particularly care, and I'm sorry, listeners. TJ's not here to keep me on the tracks. My bad. But at one of my other workplaces, when I was at Shutterfly, we just started like naming people gods. And I don't mean like smart name gods. I mean like we had a god of ping pong, the god of image, the god of like whatever. And then eventually like, wait a minute, what is Josh the god of? Why is he like giving everybody else these deity titles? And I'm like, I am the god ambassador. I actually just entitle people. That's my only ability, is to sing other people's praises. It's my superpower.
That just means you're at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. You know what I mean?
It could be. I like in my mind, it's like watching Avengers and then suddenly it being revealed that there was another member and all he did was sit on the sides and he was really good at cheering them on. That's me.
Eating snacks.
Yeah.
Go get him,
He's
guys.
like, you're doing great. Go smash him, Hulk. Yeah, Cap, do that thing again. You're awesome. That's my whole role. Oh, man. Back on track. Guys, make sure you check out the other Amazon Ministry podcast shows. Teacher's going to be upset if I don't plug things, so I'm plugging them. I've been doing Dummy for Theology. We just wrapped up season 1. Season 2 is coming soon. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're talking logical fallacies. It's going to be great. Check out some of the other shows that Christian does. Let Nothing Move You. Nick's going to be guesting over there soon. Also, I don't know, buy something from our store. This shirt I'm wearing, super comfy. Get this shirt. Get this one exactly. Match me. Steal my identity. It'll be fun. And with that, since I'm clearly being too serious, we have to jump into a great ecumenical practice, the sacrament of silliness. Nick, we like to ask a silly question to start our shows off. Today's a fun one, and I'm going to first give you time to think about it. If you could have any 90s cartoon character visit Middle Earth, who would you choose and why? You know, it's not fair. I feel like you're more equipped to answer this. I should have made you go first. Actually, it's super easy for me. Based on no credentials at all, I love Rocco's Modern Life. It's like my favorite thing ever. And I just want Rocco to go to Middle Earth. He's been to space. He's just like this average, normal person who lives in like Australia, modern age. They did that like Netflix movie where they dealt with like transgenderism. And you're like, yeah, this is just a normal guy. And I want to see normal guy go to Middle Earth because all the shenanigans always happen to Rocco. And I can't imagine what great shenanigans will happen when he meets Smaug. That's what's happening when he goes to Middle Earth, if you're wondering. It's going to happen. All right, Nick.
You know, I just have to comment. Rocco's Modern Life, I feel like he would fit perfectly in the Shire, and then he would be thrust into the Fellowship, and he'd be,
He
what
would love
he
the Shire.
do? Yeah, I don't know what kind of clients he would have for the job that he has. You know, I'm thinking people like Ted Sandyman would give him a call.
Ooh.
You know.
Ooh, guys, if you follow Systematic Ecology, be looking for what if Rocco's Modern Life went to Middle Earth. All right, Nick, what's your answer to this one?
Yeah, this is, I thought about this, and it's such a tough one just because there's so many good 90s cartoons. And I might be right on the line here, but I feel like I would love to see Samurai Jack in Middle Earth. He might be 2000, 2001. I'm cheating a little bit, maybe.
No, he counts.
But I would love to see Samurai Jack. I wouldn't want him to replace Aragorn, but I'd love to see him fight alongside Aragorn and Éomer, specifically at the Battle of Pelennor Fields.
Man, you know what I thought about? And I'm going to move on from the silliness, but technically, I don't know. TJ might challenge me on this, but the anime started in the 90s, so One Piece might count. We might be able to have Zoro visit Middle Earth.
Dude, Zoro would be kind of sick in Middle Earth.
It'd be,
dude.
yeah. I'd love to watch him fight some Nazgul and stuff. It'll be great. Anyway, let's go on to some more serious stuff before TJ listens to his first podcast to go, Josh, what the heck did you do?
I just love the sacrament of silliness.
Yeah, me too. I think it needs to be practiced in more churches.
Amen.
Will, get on that. Oh, man. So one thing that we have found that helps better engender unity in the whole church is to hear one other's story. TJ and I know you, but our listeners might not know you. So would you mind sharing with them some about your faith journey and where you are in your walk in the Lord or your walk in faith now?
Yeah, no, I do not mind at all. I pretty much have grown up in the church my entire life. Don't really have like a very memorable time in my life where I like accepted Jesus or anything like that. It's always just kind of been part of my life, kind of one of those things. But my parents did not really go to church, didn't grow up in religious households. And then when they had my brothers and sisters and I, they started looking for churches. At least my mom started to. And they kind of jumped over, like we did like Catholic church, went to a Pentecostal church, etc. And so we eventually landed in the Church of the Nazarene when I was about 5 years old, which is a Wesleyan holiness denomination, evangelical denomination. And grew up in the Church of the Nazarene, was very active in church life, went to church probably 3 times a week. My mom became the children's pastor. She's still an ordained minister in the Church of the Nazarene to this day. I went to school at a Nazarene college to be a Nazarene pastor. I was a Nazarene
wow.
pastor for a little bit. And now I am at like an independent Wesleyan church. So we were part of the United Methodist Church. We broke off and we're independent. So we didn't join the Global Methodist Church or any of like the progressive branches, but we're just kind of an independent Wesleyan church that is kind of part of a conglomerate of like other Wesleyan churches that are also independent in Tennessee, which is where I live. And so I don't know. I guess I don't know if that's a good place to stop. That's kind of where I'm at right now. Yeah.
No, man. That's really interesting. All the like Methodist and Wesleyan. For some reason, I didn't know you had so much like Wesleyan background. I was just like, the other day you were like, we're in the Wesleyan Society now. And I'm like, is Nick Wesleyan? like, is he a Methodist? Like, I had no idea. In my mind, he was like Tolkienist. He had his own denomination.
I was not like I was like one of those kids. Now I'm a huge nerd and I love reading, but I was one of those kids that grew up and I was like, school's for fools. Reading sucks. Like, this is lame. And I almost dropped out of college my freshman year because I was so terrible at school. But I mean, I went to classes at my church on John Wesley when I was like 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I got nerdy about John Wesley early.
So you got the Wesleyan cred.
Oh, yeah. I went to my church's membership class when I was like 12 years old. Oh, yeah. Got nerdy.
So we're both friends, or I think it's safe to say friends, with Tom Ord. Yeah, he's awesome. Have you read his Why the Nazarene Church Should Be Fully LGBTQ affirming book?
I've read some of the essays in that book, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't finished all of it, but I read a good bit. Well, I say read. I audiobooked a good bit of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's huge.
No.
There's so many essays in that thing.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really impressive just how they were able to put that together, and especially in a denomination that's still fairly conservative.
Yeah, no doubt.
Being able to put that work together, and, it's not officially part of their church or anything. In fact, the church probably does not approve of the book. But
no, definitely not.
It's interesting that they got so many leaders from within the church to kind of participate in that. And I think that's meaningful. Yeah, sorry, you mentioned the that you were with a Church of the Nazarene. I was like, I was just kind of curious. What do they think about this?
It's funny you bring up Tom, just because, when I was wrestling with a lot of people, with what a lot of people call deconstruction now, which was like early in my pastoral career, I was like really disenchanted with a lot of stuff that I'd grown up with. I kind of discovered homebrew Christianity, which, I was like, oh, this is like way out of my league for concepts and theology and just philosophical inquiry that I wasn't ready for. And I heard about Tom Ord because he was a fairly controversial and known character in the Church of the Nazarene. And I was like, he's friends with Tripp. This is weird. And so I remember sending him emails early on, and he was just so generous and kind and sent me, here's what books to read of mine. Read, here's some stuff on process theology. And, I'm a process theologian today and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I feel like theology-wise, we come pretty close to one another. I just don't think I've owned the process title yet, just because from like reading Tom Ward stuff, there's just some ways that he defines it. I'm like, I'm not sure if I technically fit that. And I don't like using names until I'm 100% sure that fits my belief.
Yeah. It took me a few years to jump on that label myself. Because, you know how it is. You just explore things. And once you put a label on something, you're like, am I stuck here now? I don't know.
Yeah. I am afraid, though, Josh Patterson, he's going to be on our show again in a week. He was on Systematic Ecology a while back. And, man, we were talking about some books, and he mentioned the pirate book. I talked to you about it already. Why can't I think of the name of it?
I can't remember
Mutiny?
The name of it.
Is that what it's called?
I think so.
Anyway, we're going to have the author of that book on the show, so that's really embarrassing. I don't remember the name. But man, reading through it, and now I'm like, oh man, do I not like capitalism? I'm supposed to be a red bleeding American. I can't dislike capitalism, but I'm like, man, it sure does seem like capitalism sucks, though.
I mean, I'm in
That
the
book's
camp that
challenging.
says capitalism sucks. So, come on board. Come on board to the pirate ship of
Well,
anti-capitalist scene.
we'll see. We'll see how I react when tomorrow, the day recording this, so 6/12, when the Scrooge McDuck comic comes out. We'll see how much I love Scrooge McDuck now, and that might tell me where I am with capitalism. You mentioned that you were a pastor in the past tense. So could you tell us kind of some of that, like why were you and why aren't you, I guess would be the question.
Yeah, I think that for people who listen to the show who are pastors or have been pastors on their way to being pastors, that it's really hard to wrestle with deep questions, especially within a certain religious tradition, because there's going to be some things eventually that you're going to rub up against, whether it's having doubts, maybe you disagree, at least for a time. And you're supposed to be this leader and you're supposed to be like, oh yeah, you uphold these doctrines or these beliefs and you're guiding people within this specific tradition. And so there were quite a few things that I had a hard time with. And I was like, man, if I'm going to be in a denomination that upholds these things, am I going, and there's some things I disagree with, do I need to be in this space? I never had any, bad run-ins with people. Had loving, fantastic people growing up. The pastors that I worked for are still friends and people that I love. And it was just a place that I was like, I loved the work that I did, but I needed space to feel safe and explore things that wasn't going to risk my paycheck. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. What's interesting is like even for me, I was never a pastor at that church. I am technically ordained now. That's a whole other story.
I don't think I knew
But
that.
oh, it's a fun one. But that's legal stuff. It was so that I could do weddings, basically.
Oh,
But
nice. Cool.
In North Carolina, online ordination doesn't count. So,
Oh, so Tennessee
got-
passed that law a couple years ago too.
yeah, it's frustrating. But that's not what we're here to talk about. I did say, like, I was on the path to kind of get into ministry, and then I had a lot of the same things as you were. I'm like, I just don't believe the same stuff as these people. So it felt disingenuous to continue down that road.
Right.
For me, though, after I left, I realized there was a lot of church hurt and baggage I was carrying that I just didn't, like, I didn't realize that I was so hurt until I was away from it for a while. And I was like, oh. But, I've done a lot of healing since then. Yeah, I think the deconstruction stuff, it's a lot of bad raps, but for me personally, I still kind of end up more on the conservative end. I actually joined Will's church. I'm technically a member of Will's church now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And what's funny is like a large part of like why I started going to Lutheran churches and was more comfortable with it is they have a lot more freedom within the denomination. Like each individual church doesn't have to be pro LGBTQ or anti LGBT, like anything like that. So there's a lot of freedom from church to church within it, but it still has that hierarchy, like responsibility to the bishop. So it's kind of like best of both worlds a little bit. And I was like, oh, I like this. And it made me comfortable. And ironically, I'm probably on a lot of those more progressive sides of things that I was once scared of. I still consider myself more centrist, but
Where's is it the ELCA?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. It's funny because they get like the rap of like being super progressive, and I think most of the churches are, but I have discovered that some of them aren't.
Oh yeah, I had really
interesting.
I had friends who ran an MXPX podcast, and they were both involved in the ELCA, and they came from conservative backgrounds, and they were kind of ended up in progressive. I think one guy is still active in the denomination, and then I think the other one is not. But yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I totally get that. All right, so this is always difficult without TJ, but we got to try our lightning round. It's the other thing that helps people get to know you, and also it's like, man, I can't wait to put Nick through the ringer here. Like I was excited for this, so
I'm freaking ready.
I know you know, but for those who don't know who are listening, our speed round segment, we're asking a series of questions. Nick's gonna have to answer in one sentence or less. If it involves semicolons, you have to say the semicolon out loud.
Okay.
The only rule for me is I can't ask follow-up questions, which is why usually TJ does this and I mute my mic. But Once more, TJ is not here, and I have to try to do this venture on my own and
I
keep my
believe in
mouth
you.
shut. All right, Nick, are you ready?
So ready.
All right, let's go. That's not the right noise if you're watching the videos. That's from a different podcast. Here we go. All right. Who or what is God?
Man,
You also can say skip. Yeah.
pass.
What is salvation?
Non-existent.
That is a fascinating answer. I hate this game. What is the significance of baptism in the Eucharist?
I think that they are means of grace, to use John Wesley's language, and that means they are meaningful material realities that lead to transform our lives as Christians.
Man, that was a good sentence. All right. What authority does Scripture have?
As much authority as an organization or individual allows it to have.
What authority does tradition have?
Same answer.
Okay. What are your views on destiny or predestination?
I believe that I believe in free will ultimately, and that God has a aim for our lives and a desire for our lives, but ultimately we can decide what we do with that.
I just want someone to get on here and be like, I have the same view of destiny as Ted Mosby and How I Met Your Mother. Okay. Can God change?
Yes.
All right. What do you love about the Bible?
I love that it is such a diverse collection of writings where there are multiple views on God and it's canonized. There you go.
All right. What do you love about the church? I
love
don't is
that
also an answer.
What? Say it again.
I don't is also an answer, but
You know, there's love-hate relationship, semicolon. Yeah. I love the church because it's a community that actually brings people together for a common purpose and brings about, in my experience, good things for the world.
I love it. All right, last one. Which, if any, of the 7 sacraments do you follow? I have a list if you want me to read them.
The Eucharist, baptism. For me personally, marriage is one. Give me some other ones.
Okay. You also could say confirmation, penance, anointing of the sick, or holy orders.
None of those.
All right. There we go then. You aced the speed round, not the lightning round. I hit the correct button the second time, so that's good. Everyone's welcome.
You're killing it. You're doing a fantastic job.
I need TJ here.
TJ, you
All
abandoned us.
So, Nick, you're one of our favorite people. I don't know if you know that.
Aw.
We love you. But
Love you too.
even though TJ would rather play Valorant. There's a lot of reasons why you're one of our favorites. Among those reasons is your passion for all things Tolkien. It's actually what started our friendship in the first place. We were at Theology Beer Camp, and Will was like, that guy over there, he's got a beard like you, and he likes Tolkien. And I was like, that doesn't mean we're friends. And then it did.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
We both said Silmarillion, and we were like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then we proceeded to be in the middle of a like pinball machine bar, and everyone was playing stuff. And I was like, let me ask you about Rings of Power and how you think it relates to the Silmarillion. And we just sat there talking about it for a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was a good time. But what would you say, or could you unpack for us? Like, what sparked your passion for everything Tolkien, and how'd you get involved with the Tolkien Society's academic journal?
Yeah. It was early on in my life that I had experienced works from Tolkien, or at least adaptations. Early on in my life, I watched the animated Hobbit from Rankin and Bass. Loved it as a kid, had no idea it was related to anything Tolkienian, didn't even know who J.R. Tolkien was. And then, as the Peter Jackson films came out, loved those movies. My family loved those movies. And it kind of stayed there for a long time. And when I was in college and I was failing, like I had previously talked about, I had a professor who said, what'll make you a better student is if you read something that you want to read. And I said, interesting. So I went back and I was like, I'll read the Chronicles of Narnia. Those are short, kids' books, easy. Destroyed those in a summer really quickly. Then I was like, I always wanted to read Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Let's go. Read The Hobbit. And then I proceeded to read Lord of the Rings and fell in love with it. And it was kind of like my beginning stages of deconstruction that I read the Lord of the Rings, and it kind of grounded me back in spirituality a little bit, kind of had a mystical experience with it. And then I found out there was this thing called the Silmarillion in the Tolkien Society. And I was like, what the heck is this? Read the Silmarillion, immediately joined the Tolkien Society after that. And I have just been a Tolkien freak ever since.
I love it. I love it. We get the Jesus freaks and the Tolkien freaks. And
yeah.
You can be both.
Oh, amen.
Man, I also love Tolkien and Silmarillion. And what's really funny is my interactions with Nick went from like, for those who don't know, there are different levels of fans. When you talk about Lord of the Rings, a lot of people have seen the movies and that's about it. And then you have people who are like, they know the names of every single sword, the story of every tree. And like, they got it all memorized. They got it all like super into it. And for me, I really like Silmarillion because I like some of the backstory. I like the stories of the, they're not gods, but we'll call them gods for ease sake today.
Yeah.
The Mayars and the Ayars, whatever.
The Valars, we're there.
Yeah. But we'll just say gods. I love that. I love the mythos of Tolkien's world, which is named Arda. Middle Earth is part of Arda, but you have to say Arda because, man, the story of the fall of the Numenor, I'm slaughtering the name, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you're talking about Numenor?
Thank you. Look, my brain's struggling today. That story, though, it's fantastic. Also, you can get it on audiobook now, which is great.
Oh, yeah.
And you probably should before season 2 of Ring of Powers come out. But no, so I remember doing all that and like watching Rings of Power and being like, oh no, I know Silmarillion. And in my mind, I'm like a little Tolkien baby. I'm like, all I know is the movies, and I'm a weakling. And I talked to Nick, and Nick is just so encouraging. He's like, actually, dude, you know the stuff. You just don't know the names. And he's like really encouraged me to love Tolkien more and to be comfortable with where I'm at with it.
Dude, one of my favorite videos that you put out on one of the shorts you did, or reels / YouTube shorts, was when you were like, should the final battle in the Legendarium be canon? And I was like, this is my favorite. This is my favorite.
Man, we should do a whole episode on the final battle on
so fun.
Systematic Ecology. Because I love that. It's like Tolkien doing, hey, here's how I would do Revelation.
I mean,
and I argue we did it better.
Yeah, you've got Turin, who is a human, who gets to kill Satan at the end of the... I mean, it's pretty sweet. Pretty sweet.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, you get that, like, all of the legendary characters coming back. I'm like, this is like Endgame, but Lord of the Rings, and it was just taken out of canon. And I'm like, no, bring that sucker back.
Bring it back, dude.
Anyway, that's my take. If the Tolkien Society listens or wants my opinion on anything,
you can always join. You can always write for our publications and see if they'll get accepted.
I just join for the sole purpose of advocating for the final battle.
Just be on your high horse. Yeah, I'm ready for you to have a regular
thing I want.
periodical.
Just once a month. Here's my next argument for why the final battle should be.
Oh my gosh. How many emails have we gotten from Josh Noel?
It's like eventually someone will just have to make a show or movie to get me to shut up.
I mean, people have critiqued Tolkien's son for not doing the right textual work and not including the right things in the Silmarillion. So you could be one of those people.
I think I am technically, but only on one specific thing. The rest I don't care about. Oh man. Anyway, so no, we both love Tolkien. We both have a lot of joy that we got out of it. What value do you think there is other than just entertainment? Because let's be real. Having Aragorn come back at the end of time to fight the final battle, sick idea. That's just fun. But also, I think there's a lot of spiritual value. You mentioned that you had a sense of mysticism with it. What value do you think ordinary people can get out of just reading Tolkien's works?
Yeah, it's tough because I'm going to speak to my own experience because Tolkien is clear that Tolkien was a Roman Catholic and he was a firm believer that nobody can write without being historically located in their own experience. And so he claimed that the Lord of the Rings and his writing was Catholic just because he was Catholic and you can't get around that. It's just going to seep in at some point. But he didn't write in a way as like he didn't make it it wasn't a Christian fantasy, anything like that. But there are multiple people who have had religious experience with Lord of the Rings. And so I think that there's value in the sense of like Tolkien has an essay called On Fairy Stories, and he talks about basically writing fantasy or creating art in general is one of the ideal aims that God has for us as humans, because God is ultimately, quote, he is the creator. And so if we are holders of the image of God, bearers of the image of God, that are one of the highest forms of being human is creating art. And so I knew nothing about this when I read Lord of the Rings, but I think that stuff probably spoke to me and impacted me emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, on all those levels. And so then when I drew into this world, it gave me a perspective on the world that kind of supplemented my Christian faith. Yeah, and it's just been very meaningful to me on as far as just pursuing it for fun and doing research stuff, as well as also using it as kind of like a spiritual tool in my own life. Yeah.
Yeah. What's ironic is you and I have before talked about one of the more spiritual moments I've had with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And this is really weird. It's some of the background that goes into the battle of the Two Towers, where you learn the story of why the Ents exist. And then you see that that's the same story of why the dwarves are there. And you see how the dwarves have made their palaces part of the land. They're part of the ground. And then Sauron, who represents industry and capitalism, kind of comes in. But all of this backstory of the Ents and all this stuff is actually what causes them to be able to win this battle, which all of Lord of the Rings kind of hinges on this. If they lose that battle, they lose all of it. The ring does not make it to Mordor.
Yeah.
So when you see that, you really see how all the pieces come together. For me, it was really weird because it was a moment of just realizing the sovereignty of it all. And yeah, this isn't a true story, but it was one of those of like, it had that vibe of like, that's what God does. And it just was right there in the story of creation. And like, you could have missed it if you never read the story of creation in the Silmarillion, right?
Yeah.
And then also it had that power to me, and it's what got me on the whole kick of like, love our planet, take care of our planet, because it's like, no, it is important. It might seem unimportant, but stuff that seems unimportant can still be important, and that's something that Tolkien did a really good job of shining a light on.
Yeah. Tolkien was a big believer in providence, and I'm somebody who is uncomfortable with that language, while also being humble about being humble about not knowing everything. But Tolkien is very clear, like you said, that God has a will and is kind of moving the pieces in a way and setting up things for characters to make free choices to do good. And part of that, like you said, is taking care of the earth, taking care of one another, fighting against evil and industry and things that are exploitative and things like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. And we're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but you and Trip, the first time I went to Theology Boot Camp, y'all were talking about like a lot of the point of Lord of the Rings and how Sam was actually the main character, which is great. It's great to think of like, if anyone was going to be the Christ figure, it's not Aragorn, it's Sam.
Oh yeah.
And then just kind of like what that implicates, because he wasn't the one who took the ring all that way. He wasn't the one who won any of the fights, but like he was the good friend. And that's what the story was really about. That and how Sauron and all this stuff that represented industry wasn't it, but the Shire, the simple life. That's actually what we should be desiring. And I mean, there's so much richness in his stories. I think everybody should pick it up. Do you think because the story has more about themes and less about theology, that's why it's so easy for like, because, you know, usually if I am like, hey man, read this Catholic book, most of my Protestant friends are going to, they're not going to read that. They're going to look at me like I'm crazy because I asked them to read some Catholic work. But man, if I give them Lord of the Rings, they're like, oh, heck yeah, man.
Oh,
no
yeah.
questions asked.
You know, people have talked about, you know, there's people who are analytically minded, or what is it? There's the left brain and the right brain type stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of the same thing with like theology, in my opinion. It doesn't have to be just theology, but for me, I'm definitely a story guy. I like theopoetics, like analytical theology. It has a place and I think can be good, but it's not for me. I think that like if someone was like, hey, you're struggling with spirituality, why don't you just read Lord of the Rings? You know, that I would rather read Lord of the Rings than, you know, a systematic theology book.
Man. And ironically, there's two things that C.S. Lewis said. And of course, I always bring C.S. Lewis up, but I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
What's funny is when we do Theology Beer Camp this year, my understanding is that we are going to be part of a Lord of the Rings panel because we got to do Lord of the Rings. This is going to be fantasy based. There's going to be a Narnia panel. I'm trying not to be on just because I don't like Narnia. I love C.S. Lewis. I'm not a big Narnia fan.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm just like, I felt like it was lazy writing.
Man.
Also, some of Tolkien's things of like, hey, you can't just mishmash mythologies together. I'm like, yeah, he's got a point. And it's so allegorical that it's like, it almost comes as off to me like one of those like cheesy Christian movies where it's like, Jesus! And I'm like, that's not, no, I need some more nuance to what happens here. What are you doing, man? But also, it's a kid book, so I'm just being harsh for no reason.
You be harsh.
However, two of the things Lewis writes, though, like or talks about, I don't even think this is like really in his writing as much as like people who just documented things he said. But one thing is like his own personal practice is like he said between new books, before he read a new book, he'd go back and read another old book that he knew he liked.
Oh yeah,
and I've taken that as like part of my own personal thing, and like it's not because I think that's like spiritually something you should do or anything, but it's one of those. It's just like. Because if you go from new book to new book, sometimes they're just all bad and they're just disappointments. But man, I can go new book and then like, hey, let me reread Lord of the Rings to like reset and like go to my comfort place before I do something new and challenge myself in a new way or something like that. Or honestly, what's funny is I started this also because C.S. Lewis. Don Quixote is also one that I reread a lot, and that's a pretty big book, but it's nice. Yeah. It's comforting. Les Miserables is one for me too. I've read Les Miserables a lot.
Dang.
Sorry, getting off on tangents. But the other thing though that Lewis talks about that makes me go back to Lord of the Rings is I actually think this might be part of Narnia. I'm not sure, but he talks about how often our reasoning stands guard. It doesn't let in new ideas, and if we allow our imagination and we like embellish stories that can sneak past our guard and let us see new ideas for what they are and wrestle with them in new ways. And I think that's the thing. Like Tolkien is very Catholic. His work is extremely Catholic, but Lord of the Rings isn't, hey, let me tell you why the Catholic Church is right. So it doesn't combat your reasoning guard. It kind of sneaks past it unless you see the story for what it is and to just kind of embrace or engage with the morals, the theology that he actually is trying to say, rather than getting caught up on the technicalities and the analytics of it all.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt.
All right. I found an excuse to squeeze in C.S. Lewis. Let's move on to Wesley. So you've been working with the Wesleyan Theological Journal. Journey probably is right too. I don't know. What can you tell us about how you've gotten involved with that project?
So I have, I've been with the Wesleyan Theological Society since, I want to say it was either late 2019 or early 2020. But I haven't done anything with the Wesleyan Theological Journal. You just get a copy,
Okay.
2 copies
My
a
bad.
year. No, it's okay. I just, if someone gets on there and they're like, this guy's never done anything with the Wesleyan Theological Journal, I don't want to claim credit. I did
You've
submit
mentioned
something
it before. That counts.
Yeah, I did submit something actually this past week for the journal. So fingers crossed that it gets published. But
I want to see it.
Yeah. I did present. So my first academic conference presentation was at a Wesleyan Theological Society meeting in 2020, right before things shut down. It was early March, and I literally presented. It was on punk and Wesleyan theology. Well, it was a very fun paper, and then I came home, and everything shut down. And
Well,
yeah. So anyway, yeah,
that's
I don't
fun.
know. Yeah, what what's next? I don't know. Am I just telling
Have I
how I'm more involved?
have I mentioned to you how I got married in February 2020? We went on our honeymoon to Disney World, and a week later they shut down Disney World.
No.
Yeah,
Man,
we
you
had.
really did get in there right. You got there
Yeah,
right
I
in
had I
time.
had no idea that. Well, see, what's funny is that's not even true because I had a friend who works in a virology lab. I won't say who or where, whatever. Just know that I have a friend who does that, and he was like stocking up on like toilet paper and stuff. And in my mind, I'm like, he's just being silly. He's crazy. And then I'm like, well, shoot, I guess I should have been. And like literally while we're getting ready for our wedding, he's like, you mind if I just go buy this huge thing of toilet paper? And I'm like, no, I mean, whatever, dude. Man,
Man,
do
the
I feel
foresight.
foolish.
The foresight.
Yeah, it's yeah. Anyway, so the Wesley brothers are inspiration for a lot of our Christian traditions today. So people who might be familiar with the AME Zion Church, the United Methodist Church we mentioned earlier, a lot of Pentecostal denominations too. So many of these traditions have become divided recently, especially the United Methodist Church. When
Hmm.
we look at issues like politics, abortion, LGBTQ rights, all that kind of stuff. Where do you think the Wesley brothers would come down if they just lived to today? Where do you think they'd come down on some of these issues?
Man, it's tough to say. And I guess too, this is why the Wesleyan Theological Society is important, is because it was kind of part of why it exists, is because it was also birthed out of a sort of communion of Wesleyan holiness denominations, including, more mainline traditions, evangelicals, Pentecostals, Seventh Day Adventists. They're kind of all
Yeah.
all there with some Baptists, but kind of similarly, today, even within the society, you can feel that division.
Hmm.
And of course, even within individual congregations, as you hinted at within these denominations. I think the Wesley brothers, it's so tough because they were Anglican back in the day in the 1700s and members of the Church of England. They were very politically patriotic about England, had some issues with the revolution, the American Revolution, and but at the same time, they were kind of politically and institutionally rebellious in the sense that they stayed, more John Wesley than I think Charles Wesley. But John Wesley started, uh, so Methodists were societies. They were basically like small groups, if you want to use that modern term, you know, sort of different, but they were basically these individual societies called Methodists within the Anglican Church to focus on piety, which meant like serious prayer. They had a specific diet. They weren't allowed to drink tea because caffeine was, bad or something.
Yeah.
Um,
Mormons still kind of practice that.
yeah, it's true. Well,
Pretty
and
interesting.
Joseph Smith said that Methodists were the closest things to being right about God than
Yeah.
any other Christian denomination, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Just as a sidebar,
Yeah.
and also to make Christian Ashley upset at me, I'm much more willing to think of Seventh Day Adventist as cultish than I am to think of Mormons as a cult.
Oh,
Just
interesting.
as a sidebar. But that's
No,
because
100.
yeah, I mean part of it's
I
just because I've been friends with enough Mormons that I've been able to ask them questions and all of the crazy stuff you hear that I'm like, yeah, if all that's true, yeah, it's a cult. Yeah, most of it's not true.
Yeah, here, they're not the ones who are coming up with various predictions about when Jesus is coming back, which has been just that's like how the Seventh Day Adventists were birthed, basically.
Yeah, that like a acid trip dream from a lady. And what's funny, this is Man, I'm sorry to get on this tangent, people. And hey, there's something called the fallacy. So, I mentioned Dummy for Theology. We're going to talk about fallacies soon. One fallacy is the fallacy, which is the idea that something is wrong because they used a logical fallacy to get there. You can still be right and have come to the conclusion poorly.
Right.
For example, I could think that 2 + 2 = 4 because once upon a time when aliens came down, there was 2 of them. And when they zapped 2 dogs, that created 4 dogs. That would be terrible reasoning, but I'm still right that 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah.
So throwing that out there, fallacy exists. But Ken Ham, all these people with like the Creationist Museum and all that, a lot of them got their inspiration from Seventh-day Adventists who believed in a lot of this literal flood stuff specifically because of an acid dream. So, I'm not saying you guys can't be right, but I am saying a lot of where those ideas came from, not great.
Yeah, I'm all about church unity, and I respect people's beliefs, but you're wrong.
Yeah, I love Christian Ashley, but I don't
Christian.
think there was a universal flood. But also, I do, for the record, I think Christian Ashley's smarter than me. So there's that.
Yeah,
I try to be,
you're the best.
Yeah. So I might disagree with him, but he's smarter than me. So take that for what you will, guys. Anyway, so back to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
You were saying politically that the Wesleyans were more on the progressive side of things back in their own time?
I don't know if progressive is the right word, and I'm basically just avoiding your question without really answering it for a modern context. But John Wesley let women preach. Mm-hmm. He basically gave people who were not ordained or licensed in the Anglican Church permission to preach, which was a big no-no. Mm-hmm. Eventually women started administering the sacraments, which was like a next level of just craziness. And even John Wesley, he would do field preaching, and people were mad because obviously you couldn't reach people if it wasn't in a literal brick and mortar Church of England chapel. And so John Wesley basically said phooey to a lot of these things and said God can be present in just about anything. And, it's just, I don't know what social issues John Wesley would be down for now. You know what I'm saying? It's easy because, especially, one thing I want to avoid by answering this is because I think I'm very much progressive theologically and on the social issues politically. Mm-hmm. Pretty much I check those boxes, and so I don't want to fit Wesley into my modern where I'm like, oh yeah, of course John Wesley would be LGBTQ affirming. I don't know if that's true, just because I don't think it was an issue in the same way that it is today.
And they didn't know as much about it. Yeah, I think it's a very different question to say if we dropped them from their own time, we picked them up in a time machine and then dropped them today. That's a very different question than if they had just lived this long,
Yeah.
So I'm not as familiar with Wesley or Tolkien, but if I'm thinking like C.S. Lewis, a lot of his writings, super progressive for his time. If you read Screwtape Proposes a Toast, like the post letter to the Screwtape letters, he's basically just describing what's going to happen to the school systems in America. And then also saying, by the way, Donald Trump might happen. Like, if you read it, it sounds like he's just telling the future. And it's like, wait a minute, what? Like, he's like, yeah, hey, if we keep on going down this route, eventually they're going to use their own text and justify violence. And they're going to justify political violence. And then they'll be afraid to tell their kids stuff because, and I'm like, hold up, all that stuff happened, Lewis. I'm like, wait a minute, what do you mean? And it's like, wow, I know he wasn't a prophet. He never claimed to be. But man, and a lot of like how he thought of women and stuff, it's like, oh, okay, that was really progressive for his time. But in today's time, he did say stuff about how like women should leave the men alone so that they could do high thinking, and women weren't really going to do that kind of thing. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's gross. And that's, so if I just dropped him in today's time, we'd all probably cancel him. He'd be super conservative and we'd hate C.S. Lewis. Yeah. But maybe if he had time to grow, I'm not sure where he'd end up.
It's interesting you bring that up just because there's some things that Wesley, because Wesley was like that too, where you're like, Wesley was one of the first proponents for animal rights. Like he basically told people
that's
it
cool.
was a sin to hit their horses because it was God's, creation. Because back in the day, horses were property and people would just beat the crap out of their horses. And Wesley was like, yeah, you're sinning and you could be at risk of going to hell for doing that. And you're like, whoa, Wesley, animal rights? This is weird. And then, of course, he would say something, weird about women as well. Yeah, like you said, I don't know if Wesley lived that long, would he eventually come to these more conclusions? Or, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, according to Tolkien, though, C.S. Lewis did down a pint of beer before he even got to breakfast. So, I mean, I think he'd still be at Theology Beer Camp.
During Lent, C.S. Lewis said that he was cutting down, and Tolkien said, yeah, he said he was cutting down, and he had 3 imperial pints of beer before noon. So,
Yeah, yeah. And it's just funny because, like, in that time, there wasn't as much stigmatism in the church around beer specifically. So I was like,
no. Especially in England, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And what's funny, too, is, like, how much of, and I know this isn't the point, but we're just going to talk about Lewis, Wesley, and Tolkien all at once, because why not? No, I thought what was interesting to me, how much of, like, Lewis would write stuff. Like, he would talk about Job, and he was like, there's just no reason at all that any reasonable person would read this and think that this literally happened. He's like, this, as someone who, mind you, he was a literature scholar, he said, yeah, if you look at this, it is quite clearly fiction. It's quite clearly doing these literary tropes. It is very clear what the literature is of this book.
Right.
And he was an expert. There was no reason to question him on that. But then he would turn around on some stuff that the church would say, and he'd be like, well, I'm not a theologian. I'm not that smart. And he was very humble, so he just went with what the church said. And I'm like, man, I had to commend your humility, but also I would have loved to see Lewis challenge him on that, like Eminem style. Let's write a rap and destroy the church for thinking this, Like,
oh, yeah.
Oh, man, I think the church needs more Eminems. That's what I'm getting at.
100%.
Yeah. Oh, man. So we talked about Wesley, we talked about Lewis, we talked about Tolkien. So we got an Anglican, a Catholic. Wesley was an Anglican, but I'm gonna lump him in with Methodist because he kind of started his own thing, basically. How are we able to talk about all these people, learn from all these people, and maybe not always agree with them? Like, I'm not a Methodist. There's some stuff that Wesleyans think that I'm like, I'm not sure I'm on board with that. But I feel like I'm still if I pick up a John Wesley book, I'm going to learn, I'm going to grow from that. How are we able to kind of I don't know, hold these things in tension where maybe these people believed differently, but I can learn from all of them?
Yeah, really good. I love that. They all went to Oxford too, coincidentally.
That's kind of funny. Should we just be Oxfordists?
I'm not saying, also John Tolkien, John Wesley. I mean, we got Clive's Staples Lewis, but we'll give him a pass.
John's in Oxford. That's how we find unity.
Yeah, 100%.
Every pastor should be a John.
I mean, my middle name's John, so
all right, there we go. I was almost named John. I was this close to being a pastor.
I mean, Joshua, Jesus. I mean, just the J's in general.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There we go. Now we're on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I love it. I love it. No, yeah, but I think. Yeah, sir, go ahead.
I was just going to repeat the question in case we forgot, but it sounds like
Repeat it.
Okay.
For the listeners.
Yeah. YouTubers going to have a lot more fun than listeners probably, but it's fine. What was the question? Oh, so Tolkien kind of representing Anglican, Tolkien kind of representing Catholics, Lewis kind of representing Anglicans, and Wesley kind of starts the Methodist movement. We're able to learn from all of these without necessarily having to be Anglican, Catholic, or Methodist. You could be none of those things and still learn from all of those. How do we hold the fact that these great men that we learn from might be from traditions that we don't agree with and still able to learn from them? How do we hold that tension and move forward?
Yeah, I think it's important not to put God in a box and therefore not putting traditions in a box and ourselves in a box. And people and God and theology and these things are just complex. We've talked, right? I'm somebody who loves Lewis we both love Tolkien. I love John Wesley, vastly different things. I also love coffee and punk music, and these things are part
South
of
Park.
they've in South Park, and these things have informed who I am as a person. And over time, there are things that I used to love about South Park that make me cringe. Similar with John Wesley, I grew up in the Church of the Nazarene specifically. John Wesley had this idea of entire sanctification, which means that Christians have the ability through the power of the Spirit to be perfected in Christ, which means at some point it is possible in this earthly world that a human has the capability of never sinning in their immortal life ever again. And
I'd like to get there.
yeah, it's a noble pursuit. I don't agree with Wesley there. I don't think that's possible. I think that we're flawed. And I even think that probably even in the next life, will spend the rest of our eternity changing and being perfected by the Spirit and being sanctified in that way. And so there, in both, I'm pretty sure that Lewis and Tolkien had views on sanctification that were radically different. And I think that there are specifically Tolkien and Wesley, but I think Tolkien's views of sanctification through the Lord of the Rings and his Roman Catholic faith has kind of informed my own understanding of that. And I think that's the biggest thing is being humble and being open to being transformed by other Christians. Specifically, I would broaden that too to other religions as well, but I'll keep it within the whole church podcast. Yeah, I would just say being humbly open to being transformed by others.
Well, and sometimes too, our frameworks don't allow us to get to certain things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
So this is really funny. So I'm gonna go to Lewis, and then I'm gonna go to a scholar that a lot of people probably know, Christian Ashley.
Ooh, yeah.
He's a great one to learn from. But no, I think of Lewis, and I think my fear is, and this is gonna sound so weird. I'm kind of glad he's not alive, because
No, I'm with you.
of how cancel culture works today. I realize that if he had lived much longer, I wouldn't be allowed to learn from him. And we're kind of still in danger of that. Like a lot of schools and stuff today are like, oh, hey, you can't like Abraham Lincoln. You can't like George Washington because they had slaves. And mind you, that is a terrible thing. They have done plenty of terrible things. But man, to throw everything away because they happen to live in a time where they weren't capable of seeing the whole picture there. Like, I hate that. I really do. I understand where people are coming from. Like, yeah, we don't want to support someone who supported those things, but he's also dead. So you're not really supporting them. Anyway, this is a side note.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
But, I'm thinking of Lewis, and I'm like, there's so much stuff that I love. And then there's like, and maybe I sound like a terrible C.S. Lewis fan because I don't really like Narnia. And I think in Mere Christianity, his argument for Christianity isn't a great argument. Like I think his like everyone has a sense of like good and bad. I'm like, well, it kind of feels like maybe you haven't seen enough of the world, because there are parts of the world in different times in history and culture where murder was looked at as a good thing, and like war was good to people and it was honorable. And I'm like, I don't agree with that. Like, I feel like that was just a bad argument, Lewis.
Yeah.
But I still, when I come to like his reflection on the Psalms, I'm challenged. When I think of like his writings on love, I have to rethink things. When I look at Tolkien's story of who Sam was when it came down to it, and when Frodo wanted to trace Gollum instead, and you see how Sam found a way to stand by his friend, that challenges me, right? Like, and all of these people challenge me in different ways. Christian Ashley, he has this framework of like the Bible is literally true and it's all just completely right, which allows him to see scripture in a completely different way than I do. So sometimes I'm listening to the Let Nothing Move You podcast, and he's like, here's what this thing in Genesis means. And he's asking questions that I wouldn't think to ask, because I'm like, oh, that's just a story. It didn't really happen. But to him, it really happened. So he's asking questions that I would have never even thought of. And sometimes that brings up stuff that I couldn't have thought of with my own framework. But because I'm listening to someone with a different framework, I'm able to learn and grow more. Even though I didn't agree with how we got there, I'm still able to think of stuff that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
And it's beautiful because that very thing happens within the pages of scripture itself, where there is literally like it, I'm at the point where I'm very much a process person, and I like kind of fight that classical theist kind of thing. But for me to say, yeah, there's nothing in the Bible that points to God being, omniscient or omnipotent. No, I think there are things in the Bible, but there's also things that shows that God is open and changes. And so it just depends on where you want to land. And like you said, if we listen to each other, we can and be open to the way that someone like Christian or even, Tripp approaches the Bible and the Christian tradition, asking vastly different questions that will, if we're open to it, it'll hopefully transform us and make us better Christians and people.
Yeah. I think it's funny that whenever me and you get together, we talk about Christian Ashley. But
I think we just miss him. We wish you were here, Christian.
Yeah, that's it. No, this is really funny. But one of the more classic arguments that me and Christian have revolves around that universalism thing. Yeah. And it's so interesting because, mind you, I don't feel the need to take the Bible literally, but it's just us taking different parts literally, really.
Yeah.
When it comes to the universal question, because I'm like, no, Paul writes exactly the words in like Greek logical structure, just as we all have sinned in Adam, we all are saved in Christ. Just as means exactly equal. So like I'm reading that very literally. Like all are saved in Christ. That is what it says. And he instead wouldn't read that literally, but instead reads all are sinned. All have to confess. And he's looking at that stuff very literally that I'm like, I mean, all have to confess, but all are saved. It says right here.
No, it's so good because we all are, and I don't want to say guilty, but we just all negotiate. That's why before when you gave me the lightning round, why I said the answers to tradition and scripture, because all of us, no matter what, individually and with the community, negotiate what we want with the church, and ultimately we end up kind of falling back on our own preferences. And if we're open to the Spirit, I think that can be actually healthy and good.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of lightning round, one sentence answer, same question. How do we learn from different people of different backgrounds and different traditions, knowing that we don't necessarily agree with all of it?
We need to seek them out with the intent to listen and not argue or thwart their arguments with our counter arguments.
I like it. Dan Koch did a series on his podcast that I'm trying to remember the name of. Help me out here.
You have permission.
Yeah. In my mind, it's the Dan Koch podcast. But he did a series of intellectual humility, is what they called it. And I like the term. But I think I prefer more humbly curious.
I like that.
You're not listening to people so you can debate them or argue them or like, let me listen to Christian so I can tell them why the Bible isn't literal, but rather actually curious. Humble that you could be wrong and curious what the other people think and say and engaging with the same questions they're asking, even if you don't agree with how they got to the question.
Yeah. I love that.
All right. I feel like somehow this was like a two-way interview. Like I'm asking you stuff and it's making me think of stuff, and like that's just I think it's because we're too close of friends. It makes interviewing harder because like it just becomes chatting.
It makes me happy.
Oh man. So we talk a lot about Tolkien and Wesley. Are there any questions that I didn't ask that you wish I would have asked? They're like, because I know people think of you as like the Tolkien guy or maybe the Wesleyan guy, and they're always like, "What'd you think of Rings of Power?" But is there a question that like maybe people don't ask enough that you're like, I wish someone would just ask me about this instead?
I don't think so. I think that, just because the whole church and systematic ecology, and you kind of mentioned that, at systematic ecology with C.S. Lewis talking about like how imagination kind of disarms us and allows us to kind of like do stuff, which is what systematic ecology does as well. But John Wesley kind of believed that, where everything he argued could be a means to, he called it a means of grace, but basically anything can be an avenue to Christ. Very cool. And even Tolkien also believed that because God is creator and created everything. Everything is inherently good, and therefore anything can lead us to understand God, and at least an aspect of God. And so I think those are probably the two things that tie together for me, and probably why I was attracted to Tolkien in the first place from my Wesleyan background, and why, at least for me, they fit so neatly into my own spiritual experience. Yeah. So you kind of not no questions asked, but
This is like live proposing a future episode of something. I don't know what. I think on some podcast at some point, I would like us to discuss Tolkien's own questioning of his own work, where he even said that he kind of didn't like how he did the orcs because he does believe that God made all things good. So it's kind of a, wait, why are the orcs always evil? I think that would be a fun question to ask on something at some point.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we need to dig into that. Sorry. Here I am answering my own question because I'm like, here's what I want to talk to Nick about.
I kind of explore that in a paper I wrote for the Tolkien Society on South Park and Tolkien. So anyway,
that's fun.
I'll bring it in, and we can have that discussion. I would love that.
Fantastic. Yeah, we should. Yeah. So guys, if you want to hear more from Nick, go to Tolkien Pop. Go to, I don't know. He is sort of involved with, just look up Wesleyan stuff. He's also going to be part of the Artapalooza. We're going to talk about all things Lord of the Rings on Systematic Ecology next week live. Actually, this week for you guys listening. Tonight, when this episode drops live, you can hear Artapalooza with me, Nick Polk, Trip Fuller, and some other people.
Yeah.
We're not sure who all's going to show up. We'll find out. And then Nick's going to be back in a few weeks. We're going to talk with him and Brandon about a new Johnny Cash album, Postmortem, and other postmortem works, and maybe some of the Bible books that were put together postmortem. We'll see. We'll see, guys. For now, though, one thing we like to do before we end our show, we always like to ask our guests, if you had to point to something tangible, something practical that our listeners could go do right this second, Nick, something that could just stop this podcast and go do it, and doing this action would help engender unity in the church, what action would it be?
Go find somebody within the church that grinds your gears. Find a video, picture, I don't know, something. Find that person that you would normally just cringe at. Find them, pray for them. And, specifically pray for, I would just pray that, say, if I was in front of this person, help me to be like Christ. Help me to love this person as you love them. There you go.
I'm going to make it extra practical then. Because as you were saying that, like I was challenged because I'm thinking of people on my own Facebook feed. And sorry, because I'm going to post this to Facebook. You probably know who you are. And I apologize. Who posted that photo of like, hey, I serve a savior who was persecuted without cause. Why can't I vote for someone who was persecuted without cause? And that picture of Donald Trump next to Jesus that I'm like, that's gross and wrong. And I stand by thinking that's gross and wrong. But I'm like, oh, man,
yeah.
I still got to love the person who posted that. That's challenging. That's challenging. Nick, if I learn to love them and everybody learns to do what you just said, what changes do you think we'd see in the world around us?
I think that we would find that we would have safer communities, people would be fed, and people would be happier and be better neighbors and less isolated.
Yeah. And I like that. All right. Well,
the kingdom of God.
There we go. You made Joe Day real happy. So one thing we do, the other last thing we do before I wrap up is we all share a God moment, just a challenge, a blessing, etc. Something that we have seen God in recently. Could be anything. Could be wind blowing. I don't know, man. For me, super easy. We had a baby kitten literally just walk up to our door alone. No mom around, no other kittens around, nothing. Just a baby kitten who was hurt. And for those who know me, long periods of my life, I have found it extremely challenging to love cats. I have been one who wanted to throw kittens out on their own because I hate cats. And I was just filled with so much hate around cats, which was unreasonable and maybe, not to get self-diagnosed or anything, but it's one of those things where I'm like, I might have had some psychological issues here. But I did have a lot of hate towards those animals. And I saw this kitten, knowing that I didn't necessarily want a kitten, knowing that my wife has been going through some hard times and she did want a kitten. And instead of immediately going, oh, I'm going to ignore it, or screw this cat, or being angry or anything like that, I was so happy that my wife, going through what she's going through, is going to get a kitten. And also at the same time, I was so challenged that this is a creature who's hurt, and how can I care for it and help more life happen in the world instead of more death happen? And then looking back on it the last week or two that we've been taking care of it, and just thinking of how outside of my character this would have been 5 or 6 years ago. Like, man, God has taken me a long way. And I just, I feel blessed that I've been taking so long and challenged of, I don't know how to raise a cat. So someone help.
I'll pray for you.
Thank you. Nick, what about you? Have you got anything recently?
This is a while ago now. I won't lie. I am somebody who is kind of a living life is prayer, which can sound pretentious, but really just I'm kind of more Zen in that way. So I just finished my first year of teaching high school English, and I teach at our county's alternative school. And this was like one of the very few and far between moments where I felt God kind of calling me in a certain direction, and I'm thankful. But I had been offered a job at a really nice charter school with really good pay, and kind of just interviewed at this alternative school as a formality, and just everything just felt like that's where I'm supposed to be. And it's been a great year, and I'm going back next year. So I just felt like God kind of spurred me in that direction.
My other God moment is there's a strong chance I'll be getting to hear my favorite musical artist in Nashville named Passenger, and that might be a perfect excuse to see Nick Polk.
Party time.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and you enjoyed Nick because he'll be back soon.
Oh yeah.
And we'll be talking about John Wayne. That's something new for Whole Church. Hang in there, guys. It's going to be fun. If you did enjoy that episode, please share it with a friend, cousin, enemy, etc. All those things that TJ would usually say. Not sure why you have enemies. Maybe just share it with a cousin. That sounds easier. Also, check out other shows on the Enzel Ministry Podcast Network. We mentioned Let Nothing Move You here a few times. Christian Ashley also does a show, Why I Don't Like. He's talking about some different IPs he doesn't like, and not just saying, oh, here's all the things I hate about it, but actually delving into like the real reasons that he doesn't care for it, and like trying to give it a fair chance, not just doing straw man arguments against shows. So I think it's a lot of fun. Check that out. I mentioned W for Theology is another show I do. I've also really been enjoying the Bible After Hours. Check that one out. It's good stuff. And of course, get out a t-shirt. This is comfy. I've said it. TJ, I did it. He won't listen. I don't know why I'm telling him that I did it. I accomplished my goal. Well, guys, we hope you enjoyed the show. Next week, we're going to have on Josh Patterson. Again, I won't be here for that, but TJ will be interviewing Josh Patterson of Rethinking Faith. He's going to be discussing some of his thoughts on the nature of salvation, some stuff about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, all kinds of process theology stuff. It'll be good. TJ and I will both be together again when we interview Dave Snyder from the nonprofit organization Embracing Racial Unity. So that'll be a lot of fun. And then after that, we will be doing another roundtable conversation. This time we're going to talk about whether or not churches should be nonpartisan, bipartisan, talk about politics at all, or, whatever. We're going to talk about it. This is an election year, so it could be a really interesting and good conversation. Timely conversation. Finally, at the end of season 1, Francis Chan will possibly be on. We're not really sure. It really just depends on if anyone ever tells him. As soon as he shows up, we'll decide that's the end of season 1. If he showed up right now with me and Nick, I'd be like, all right, Nick, you're the co-host. This is the end of season 1. We're doing it.
I got some things to say to you, Francis Chan.
Yeah, why did it take you so long to be here? The whole interview is just me asking him why it took him so long. Oh, man. So, guys, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.